Throughout his career, M. Night Shyamalan has managed to carve out a distinct filmography filled with stylized genre efforts, featuring compelling characters, extraordinary mysteries, and some of the greatest twists in the history of cinema. Here are all of M. Night Shyamalan's movies, ranked from worst to best. M. Night Shyamalan built his reputation on crafting thoughtful blockbuster films with non-blockbuster budgets. Of his first 7 films, none cost more than $75 million to make, so it was a little surprising that on the heels of 2 major flops, Shyamalan managed to procure a whopping $150 million for his adaptation of the fantastical adventure, The Last Airbender. Maybe he just couldn't resist the temptation to go bigger than he'd ever gone before, but those who bought a ticket to see The Last Airbender were left wondering exactly where that money went. A wave of abysmal reviews greeted the movie's release. Considering that Airbender is based on a wildly inventive Nickelodeon series, you've got to marvel at the sheer dullness of this adaptation, which is driven by soulless performances, stale visuals, uninspired set pieces, and unbelievably bad special effects. Needless to say, initial plans for a Shyamalan-directed Airbender trilogy were promptly halted, though the film still fared reasonably well at the box office. In fact, it managed to rake in north of $300 million worldwide, which may be the biggest twist Shyamalan has ever pulled. Prior to beginning production on his 2006 fairy tale Lady in the Water, Shyamalan was on one hell of a winning streak, with 2 instant classics to his credit and a couple of solid box office hits to boot. So Lady in the Water, which boasted a cast fronted by Paul Giamatti, Bryce Dallas Howard, and Jeffrey Wright, made its premiere aiming for a higher bar than even Shyamalan might have understood. Needless to say, critics were less than kind to Shyamalan's bonkers yarn about a blue-collar guy trying to help a stranded water fairy return to her homeworld. Sadly, it's hard to disagree with those reviews. Though Lady in the Water features stunning visual elements, the story is a wildly unfocused confection of kooky characters, half-baked fantasy elements, and contrived plot twists. Lady in the Water sunk with audiences too, becoming Shyamalan's first legit box office bomb, and one of his most disappointing efforts to date. Shyamalan began to work on his debut film Praying with Anger while still a student at NYU. He wrote, produced, funded, directed, and starred in the project himself. It revolves around an Americanized young man of East Indian descent returning home to rediscover his roots, and Shyamalan, who was born in India and raised in an affluent suburb of Philadelphia, based Praying with Anger on his own return trip to India in his teens. Needless to say, it was an intensely personal story. Praying with Anger has a warmth and sense of humor all but absent from much of his later work. As with most debuts, however, it isn't without its problems. The movie suffers from tone and pacing issues, and Shyamalan, never a particularly strong performer, proves he likely took on one job too many by casting himself in the lead. Whether he made that decision based on necessity or on hubris, Shyamalan's flat, detached performance is often painful to watch.
I just decided I want to see as much of India as I can. There are a lot of beautiful things in this culture. Really beautiful.
Luckily, there's enough going on beneath the surface of Praying with Anger to keep it engaging. At the very least, it's a compelling look at a first-time director figuring out just how movies work. Even after the costly debacle that was 2010's The Last Airbender, Shyamalan wasn't quite done swinging for the big-budget fences, and Hollywood studios weren't quite done betting big on the director either. Columbia Pictures ponied up $130 million for Shyamalan's sci-fi adventure After Earth. And although the reviews weren't quite as abysmal as they had been for most of his recent efforts, they weren't exactly good. That's not totally surprising. After Earth was originally pitched to Shyamalan by Will Smith as a star vehicle for himself and his son Jaden, and follows the pair as they struggle for survival after being shipwrecked on an alien planet. It's a promising setup for the Shyamalan treatment, but the surprising lack of chemistry between the real-life father and son leaves an emotional void that the movie struggles to overcome. For his part, Shyamalan once again drops the ball when it comes to the film's staging and visual elements, wasting the talents of brilliant cinematographer Peter Suschitzky along the way. Though After Earth bombed hard stateside, it did well enough overseas to turn a modest profit. Still, given his track record with tentpole fare, we're betting it'll be a while before Shyamalan goes this big again. After giving his fanbase cause for concern with Lady in the Water, Shyamalan continued his stumble with The Happening, a sci-fi thriller that follows a teacher, his wife, and their friends as they try to outrun a mysterious plague. On paper, the concept has the makings of another intriguing Twilight Zone-ish tale for Shyamalan, but the film features career-worst performances from Mark Wahlberg and Zooey Deschanel, a third act that can only be described as mind-bogglingly stupid and the sort of hackneyed, tin-eared writing that leaves one wondering how the happening got off the ground at all.
My name is Elliot Moore. I'm just going to talk in a very positive manner, giving off good vibes.
And there's a reason why this movie feels unpolished. Shyamalan was working on the script while the 2007 writer's strike loomed over Hollywood. Fearing a lengthy content drought, studios began fast-tracking productions to fill a potential void, and The Happening was one of them. It was released to some of the worst reviews of Shyamalan's career. But the one thing it has got going for it is a campy, irreverent B-movie charm that never quite lets you take the on-screen absurdity too seriously. That B-movie feel may not be intentional, but it's the only reason The Happening is at all watchable, and ultimately keeps it from claiming the title of Worst Shyamalan Movie.
Why are you eyeing my lemon drink?
In 1998, Shyamalan returned to the director's chair for his family-friendly dramedy Wide Awake. The plot follows a fifth grader who sets out on a search for God after the death of his grandfather. Though Wide Awake never quite hits home, straying too often into the realms of shameless schmaltz, it more than proved the director's skill at tackling complex, dramatic content in a clever and insightful way, as well as his ability to coax convincing performances from his cast. Shyamalan's ability to work with younger actors in particular would prove important for his next movie. It's hard to believe how many years have passed since Shyamalan turned the superhero genre on its head with his gloriously grounded origin story Unbreakable. And it's still surprising how sneakily Knight shocked the world by connecting his unhinged thriller Split into the same cinematic universe. Yet here we are, bearing witness to the rarest of big-screen events, a comic book-centric crossover based on wholly original heroes and villains. Folks going into Glass expecting a heroes versus villains throwdown on the level of the latest Marvel confection will be seriously underwhelmed by the meticulously paced action unfolding before them. But those expecting a superpowered psychological thriller akin to Unbreakable and Split will find themselves right at home amongst Glass's morally twisted tale of good and evil. The movie's ambition ultimately trumps its quality, mostly thanks to some spotty writing by Shyamalan himself, but it also takes more risks, has more fun, and features higher stakes than any film spawned by the MCU. Signs might be overly long, but it's as close to a sci-fi masterpiece as anything Shyamalan has ever delivered. It also finds the director skillfully blending his penchant for spellbinding mysteries and paranoia-drenched narratives with his go-to themes of families and strife and crises of faith, all to tell an alien invasion story with multiple twists. This tale of a fallen preacher struggling with his faith as a largely unseen alien menace threatens to rip his family apart is taut, tense, heartfelt, and harrowing. It's bolstered by one of Mel Gibson's finest performances, not to mention a scene-stealing turn from Joaquin Phoenix. For much of its runtime, Signs is a near-flawless blend of horror-tinged atmospherics, classic alien invasion tropes, and tragic religious parable that's unafraid to wear its heart, or its influences, on its sleeve. If only the final 10 minutes of the movie didn't exist, it might have had a legit claim to the top spot on this list. Sadly, that ending does exist, and if you've seen it, you probably know why Signs doesn't even earn a place in the top 5. The Village might be the most underrated film in Shyamalan's big bag of movies. Yes, its central conceit is shamelessly manipulative. Yes, the film's big twists are underwhelming and obvious, but while those issues are impossible to ignore, they're not really the point. They exist more as fan-serviced genre fodder and structural plot devices than focal points of the actual story. That story happens to be one of Shyamalan's best. It's a mournful and gothic chamber piece bent on exploring the weighty correlation between grief and fear, presented in the guise of a straight-up horror tale. The plot finds an isolated village on edge when the mystical creatures who dwell in the surrounding woods appear to break the terms of a long-standing treaty. Shyamalan wisely focuses on interpersonal drama, allowing Roger Deakins' stark, expressive photography and James Newton Howard's dolefully romantic score to bestow the village with an emotive yet disquieting unease. In the process, he tells one of his most patently human stories, one that's well worth revisiting. After reeling off his fourth straight big-budget misfire in After Earth, even Shyamalan seemed to think a break was in order. Fortunately for film lovers everywhere, he used his brief downtime to recharge his imagination and refine his cinematic approach. When he returned with 2015's pseudo-found footage thriller The Visit, he proved he was ready to reclaim the title of genre maestro. The Visit is every bit the lean, focused, genre-jumping mood fest we'd come to expect from Shyamalan's early work. Only this story, which is centered on teenage siblings visiting their grandparents and finding them entrenched in some seriously strange behavior, feels a little different. It's dangerous and even a little depraved in ways we hadn't really seen from Shyamalan before. The Visit feels like Shyamalan finally giving over to the paranoid, claustrophobic menace he'd only touched upon in his prior films, while the movie's handheld vantage points only heightened the broiling anxiety underneath. That unexpected mix of anxiousness and dark danger heralded the second coming of a filmmaker who'd found a way to tweak his signature style to feel as energetic and exhilarating as it did in the beginning. The Visit didn't quite put Shyamalan back on top, but it proved he was finally back in the game. Armed with an edgy new approach and backing from a risk-taking studio in Blumhouse, Shyamalan was about to get down and dirty with a new genre medley. It would turn out to be one of the wildest, creepiest rides of his career.
The impure are the untouched, the unburned, the unslain.
Packed with more twists than any previous Shyamalan film and anchored by an eerily transfixing performance from James McAvoy, Split follows the nightmarish tale of a man with multiple personality disorder. As he struggles to find balance in his fractured mind, a dangerous new personality threatens to take control and force him to do unspeakable things. It's a brilliant blend of psychological thriller and straight-up horror, and it earned Shyamalan one of the best reviews and box office returns of his career, all while unexpectedly leading into a belated sequel of one of his most widely acclaimed films. Unbreakable arrived in theaters in the fall of 2000 behind a cryptic trailer and under a thick shroud of secrecy. Over the years, it has proceeded to blow the minds of pretty much everyone who's ever seen it. There's really not much to say about Unbreakable that hasn't already been said, except that it's one of those rare films that remains consistently rewatchable even after you've uncovered all of its secrets. That the film contains what may well stand as career best work from Bruce Willis and Samuel L. Jackson is a big reason for the film's success, but Unbreakable's stylishly muted, hyper-realistic approach to the superhero origin story is a larger part of why it remains one of the brighter highlights in Shyamalan's filmography. Not exactly a twist ending to this list, but what else could land the top spot? No matter how many superb movies Shyamalan might make, it will always come back to his breakout supernatural hit, The Sixth Sense. Twist ending aside, perhaps the most surprising thing about The Sixth Sense is that it was released only about a year after his so-so family dramedy Wide Awake. It seems that all Shyamalan needed to find his groove was a couple of ghosts and one terrified 10-year-old. The Sixth Sense's tale of a kind-hearted boy who sees dead people found the director working with a new level of confidence. It also found him coaxing a career-redefining performance out of Bruce Willis and one of the greatest child performances in history from a young Haley Joel Osment. Yes, that twist is the stuff of legend, but the story still works even when you already know what's coming. Perhaps what sets Shyamalan's supernatural puzzle box apart from the pack is that, no matter how many times you watch it, The Sixth Sense always seems to offer something new to discover. Check out one of our newest videos right here. Plus, even more Looper videos about your favorite movies are coming soon. Subscribe to our YouTube channel and hit the bell so you don't miss a single one.